This is the IBJ podcast for the week of May 3rd, 2021. I'm Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Now that both the perfume and the allergens of spring are in the air, you may be reminded of what things were like last year at about this time. Many of us were just learning that a much greater share of our time would be spent either inside our homes or directly outside our homes. With many of us facing a semi-permanent staycation, local home and garden stores and outdoor living retailers were slammed with demand for upgraded patio furniture and grills and fire pits, landscaping features, gardening supplies, and plants. Lots of plants here at our house. We got a serviceberry tree, which I have to say is pretty marvelous. Several oak leaf hydrangeas. We refinished our deck. We bought a picnic table and installed a jungle gym / swing set that was a little expensive, but probably worth it. Now, of course, the pandemic was the reason. Now that we are several months into vaccinations, you might suspect that demand has ebbed for these kinds of products. And you would be wrong. Demand is still outstripping supply, and retailers and consumers have had to adjust to a new reality in which you sometimes have to wait several months to get the product you want. And there are several reasons. Manufacturers have trouble getting their hands on raw materials. The supply chain, in several instances, is hopelessly gummed up. Getting finished goods from manufacturers to stores is problematic. And some products, as a result, are becoming more expensive. For this week's edition of the podcast, I spoke with two Indianapolis area retailers about the increased demand, their struggles to meet it, and what it means for consumers. Now, first, we'll have Scott Horvath. He's the owner of Omalia's Living, an outdoor furniture store in Carmel. And then I'll speak with Pat Sullivan, owner of 3 Sullivan's Hardware and Garden stores, and the recently acquired Allisonville Home and Garden by Sullivan. Here's my conversation with Scott. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Scott Horvath. He's the owner of Omalia's Living in Carmel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mason.
Very quickly, what is the best way to describe Omalia's Living? If I'm going to Omalia's, what am I looking for, probably?
So we provide products that bring families, friends, and neighbors together. Patio furniture, barbecue grills outside, and fireplaces inside. So local retailer and 55 years in business.
And it's always been a family-owned business, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this right away, because I know that some consumers, including myself, are concerned. If I am a homeowner and I am just now thinking about buying maybe some outdoor patio furniture or grills or covers or some kind of outdoor fire feature, am I too late?
You're not too late, but there are some challenges this year that we've not experienced in the last 50 years.
Well, then let me ask you this question then. What is it like now to be an outdoor living retailer as opposed to maybe it was just 2 years ago?
Well, the struggle today is simply finding product, sourcing product, and getting that product to the showroom is the biggest challenge today. Cost is another issue.
What are the supply issues? What is keeping the product from getting to your place of business?
Well, it's interesting, Mason, because we're facing a variety of issues, from shortages of raw materials to transportation issues. There aren't enough containers in order to move product. There's not enough drivers in order to transport the products. Now that's on the back end. On the front end, finding steel is an issue today. So there's a variety of challenges that are affecting us.
So let's so we can talk about today. Let's go backwards just for a second to March 2020. So that's when the pandemic hit. Did you have to close for a period of time?
Yes. So we were closed for about 2 months.
So then you opened back up kind of May-ish. My memory of this is that almost immediately it became obvious that there was going to be a surge in demand for patio stuff and outdoor living things and landscaping, things like that. Is that what you saw?
That was very true. So demand spiked. The staycation model, instead of vacation, staycation peaked. The demand was more than we've ever experienced for your backyard.
What kinds of things were in the most demand?
It was interesting. In May, it was barbecue grills and then patio furniture So I think what happened in some ways is we started to have our patios and pools built. So we started with grills. As the patios finished, we turned into furniture. But then Mason, later on, the restaurants came to us with a big need for patio heaters. That happened in the fall.
My memory of trying to find like a fire pit towards the end of last year was that there were no fire pits, that everything is sold out. And I'm guessing like the same was true for heaters.
That is very true. We had the same issue with fire pits as well, gas and wood.
So again, what were your suppliers telling you? I guess, for example, for a heater, that obviously requires some kind of metal, some kind of steel, and they weren't able to source that?
That is true. So they were struggling with the sourcing, but at the same time, there was another issue happening too, depending on their location. So if a supplier was in California or Canada, the restrictions that they faced in terms of social distancing or other COVID restrictions that may have remained in place, they had to follow those regulations as well. So we had supply issues, but then those factories had to be reworked so that they were spaced out correctly enough so that they could keep their staff safe. Everything slowed up, demand peaked. The combination of the two created a problem.
Did I hear correctly that when one of your suppliers of patio furniture just could not fulfill orders in time, you like flew down to Mississippi to try to source something else?
You are correct. We need to respond to customer demand. So in August, I went down to Mississippi to interview a potential new manufacturer due to the fact that one of our manufacturers simply could not and told us up front they would have no product available. Interviewing a new manufacturer takes a lot of time. So you got to look at the quality of the product, the value of the product, the opportunity that exists, or do they have the inventory that we need? But yes, we went down to Mississippi to look at a new manufacturer, and we ended up signing them up, and their product is on the floor today.
So what was the experience of customers when they would come in? Were they experiencing like longer wait times for product?
It's been tough. We're very customer service focused, but there's a balance. In many ways, we're the customer advocate. We're working for the customer on their product. At the same time, we're the conduit to the manufacturer. So when the manufacturer gives us a story, we have to relay that to the customer. It's not always the story that they want to hear. And that makes for sometimes a tough conversation, a difficult conversation to have, but we work through it.
And how do you work through it? What do you do?
Be honest with the customer, be upfront, at the same time, be timely with our communications, to be that advocate, to truly focus on the problem and try to find the right resolution. So it's just a series of phone calls, emails, text to resolve what the problem is.
And what was happening also to the prices?
Well, unfortunately, prices have increased, and in some cases significantly. In one case, we had a manufacturer that went up 32%. That is a huge jump.
That's the price to you.
Yes. So pricing across the board has gone up, whether it be grills or patio furniture or even fireplaces. The cost of raw materials, the simple demand, the tariff issue that's still out there, fuel charges, the surcharges are back. We've seen that fee tacked back on. So a lot of fees, a lot of little nickel and diming, and we try to control that the best that we can, but those prices do ultimately get passed on to the consumer.
What is the fuel surcharge?
Well, gas prices have gone up. And back in 2008, we saw fuel surcharges. Maybe even back, if you even go back to 2001, we started to see little fuel surcharges. Right. Just an ancillary fee that a distributor, a transportation company, a manufacturer could add to the bill. A nickel here, a dime there, but eventually, based off of the number of miles, those fees add up. For a while, they went away, but we're starting to see that tacked back onto certain invoices that we receive.
So over the winter, I mean, you have indoor fireplaces. I mean, that's something that you can concentrate on indoor spaces. But how were you getting ready then for this spring and summer? I mean, did you have to approach it differently this time?
Yes. So we're buying a lot earlier. And traditionally, we have been a custom shop. So a family will come into the showroom, sit down, look at fabric, look at colors, patterns, finishes, and we will custom build a beautiful and unique set for them. Today, we're more of a grab and go. And the reason behind that is simply you got to get what's available now. Otherwise, you're waiting 16 weeks.
So if I was to order something, something that you've custom designed, in order for that to get created and sent back to me, it could be 4 months.
It could.
Wow.
Unfortunately, that's the struggle that we're facing today, is it could be 4 months.
So now they want to go into the showroom and sit on something and say, I want this. Can I take it home?
And we have it.
And you have it. Okay. So you need to be ready for those kinds of sales then.
And that's how we've changed. That's how we've had to adjust to the current market conditions, is to be someone who has furniture in stock, available, ready to go right now. We can load it up or deliver it tomorrow.
So that's, more inventory, I would assume, which kind of has its own costs, I guess.
Certainly. Yes. And it affects cash flow, and we have to be careful in terms of how far we take this. But at the same time, serving customer needs is number one priority.
What are people looking for this spring? What seems to be the most popular items?
We're seeing a lot of dining sets, and even large dining sets, up to 110 inches. And I suspect expanding outdoor dining tables. Interesting enough, we've sold a lot of rockers this year, more so than usual. Yeah, just front porch rockers.
Have you seen a difference in the customer base? How are the demographics trending?
I don't think the demographics have changed too much, but we have had a lot more early shoppers. And I suspect that maybe we had some folks that their patios, pools, decks were delayed last year because of COVID. Maybe construction didn't start until May or June, so they didn't finish up until August or September. So they were buying in February and March, their patio furniture, their grills.
And what items are you already having trouble keeping in stock?
Well, grills, definitely. We've had a lot of issues with grills. And now, interestingly enough, because of the port issue, being unable to get into the port, we just received a container of fire tables this week, and we have a container of furniture coming in next week. So from the furniture end, we're doing pretty well. We have stock.
Well, thanks for sharing this information. It really gives me, I think, a better sense of what's happening in the industry.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mason.
Now, up next is my conversation with Pat Sullivan of Sullivan's Hardware and Garden. It may sound like we're in the same room together, and you would be absolutely right. We had some trouble getting in contact via Zoom, so I performed my first face-to-face interview for the podcast in more than a year. But not to worry, we are both fully vaccinated, and we conducted the interview in a secluded location at the Sullivans on Keystone Avenue. Here's Pat. I'm very pleased to welcome back to the podcast Pat Sullivan, owner of Sullivan's Hardware and Garden Stores in Central Indiana, as well as the recently acquired Allisonville Garden and Home by Sullivan. Is that right?
That's close enough. Allisonville Home and Garden by Sullivan. Okay. You had Garden and Home. It's not a big deal, but
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I know this is your busy season. Thanks for making time. I want to ask you right off the bat about Solo brand stoves, which might be a good case study for this. So there's cylindrical metal containers. They essentially function as fire pits.
Correct.
Now this was like probably June or July of last year. My wife and I were here. We were in the Keystone store. In the very first section of the store, we see this giant bulwark of Solo stoves.
Right.
There had to be at least 50 of them.
Yes.
And so I note that and go, oh, this must be like the popular new stove. So I come back around Christmas time looking for one of these Solo stoves, and the employee says, no. We don't have any. None of our stores have any. There probably aren't any in the city.
Right.
So is it fair to say, number one, the popularity of that product was due in part to the pandemic, but also that its scarcity because we actually ordered one online and we still didn't get it till the end of February.
Right.
Was due to the supply issues that manufacturers are having.
Oh, absolutely. Pandemic driven, all fire pits, even the little cheapies, instantly gone. And then all of a sudden, here comes this guy that has a smokeless or a very much reduced smoke fire pit. And all of a sudden it caught the attention of everyone. And I remember you have to pay up front because, when a company's hot, they make the rules. So the first order, we had wrote a check for $60,000 in August, and we received the inventory in fall, like November, late October. And that's pretty much all we got until we got a big shipment in January after Christmas. So we got 150 of the big ones, and then they're now gone, and we're expecting to. But I mean, it's still, they're on top of the world right now.
So what were the solar people saying about why they couldn't get more stoves out?
Well, in a case like that, I mean, when something gets really hot like that, even Yeti a few years ago, I mean, it wasn't international shipping. It was just the demand, So I think this whole thing there's so many prongs to it. There's a shipping issue, there's raw material, but sometimes when a company's hot, they're just hot and they just can't make them fast enough. Mm-hmm. And I think that initially probably started with what the Solo stove was, and then I'm sure that they ended up running into raw materials, shipping problems like the rest of it. And it doesn't matter what it is, there's problems.
So how, in general, is running like a hardware and garden store right now different for you than it was maybe 2 years ago?
You know what? It's still pretty intense. The demand is still real high. Interesting enough that people have caught on to and started to accept the supply issue. They're more willing to wait extended times that I think a year or two ago, they're like, no way in hell am I going to wait that long. And so either they're willing to wait or they're willing to take maybe their second choice. It's like, we can't get that one for 16 weeks. You got that one in stock, I'll take it. We're America. We're used to everything, the color, the size. We want it perfect. We want it now. And all of a sudden we can't get it now. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. Seems like it's been affected.
What are the items right now that are in the greatest demand? And are those the same items that are maybe the hardest to get from suppliers?
Yeah, I mean, the things now, patio furniture remains really tight. Some raw material issues, plastic resin for American-made products. We carry this poly line that's made in Berlin, Ohio. The Yoders, just some families, Amish families that make this up, and they don't even call it an estimated ship date. It's always a promise date. They traditionally 2 weeks, height of the season 3 weeks, they're at 14 weeks.
Wow.
And that is demand and also shortage of resin for plastic.
Oh, are these the Adirondack chairs?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's just all over the board. Last year during the pandemic, it was oddball stuff. Everyone was home. I don't know if they'll ever recover as chipmunks. Evidently, we're all home and everyone sees chipmunks. And then the murder rate on chipmunks, and you couldn't buy a live trap. There was a shortage of rat traps, and it's like, it was open season. And I guess were we bored or did we not know we had chipmunks? Because you couldn't get a live trap. So that some of that type of stuff's recovered, but so it's a whole different set of things.
Speaking for myself, I was working on my back deck for most of last year. Yeah, I noticed them big time because they're trying to get the bird feeder.
I know.
And so, they're very noticeable. And then you start to see the holes, and then you start to worry about your grass and your foundation and, God knows what else.
Isn't that wild? Chipmunks were just as happy as could be living in our backyards, and all of a sudden, like, why are you here all day? It's like...
So you spoke about the resin. What other kinds of materials does it seem like suppliers are having trouble obtaining?
There's here's an example. A water wand for watering flowers. All right, it's a long tube that allows you to reach your hanging basket. One of the top manufacturers can't source aluminum tube, and so they're expecting them mid-July. And it's just across the board. Garden hoses are in short supply. And again, some of it, when you jump over back to the patio, the wicker furniture, there's 27,000 pieces made waiting for shipment from Vietnam and can't get it on containers. Then if you get it on a container, there's congestion at the ports, so getting them unloaded. So it's just across the board. It's kind of odd. It's
When you say container, those are those giant, rail car like
the
things.
shipping containers. They're like, they're 40 foot. Just you see them stacked, just like what was stuck in the Suez Canal.
So they literally cannot get containers yet.
Right.
All the
We get
containers are
them.
in use.
It's like, but everything's delayed. We're waiting on a container of umbrellas that was ready to ship December 6th, and we're expecting it May 3rd. Yeah, we just have a lot of furniture still waiting to come. And I will say, in the old America, people would be, just going after us. But a lot of people have the understanding. It's like they get it. They hear the news. They understand the shipping is a mess. The manufacturing is a mess. The demand is high.
So what is this doing to the prices of your products?
Prices, it's kind of funny that we were already dealing with, there's still Patio out of China has tariffs on it. So we were already dealing with that. Everyone asks, well, everybody shares in the tariff. The Chinese manufacturer will take a bite out of that. Some of it goes to the retailer. So truly it's not 25%, but there is something. So we already had a little higher prices than normal anyways. International shipping has gone up quite a bit. In some cases, if I've heard of guys booking containers for $12,000, $13,000 when a container last year you could get a container over here for $5,000 to $7,000. So that adds up quite a bit. So,
and that's just because they're in much greater demand.
Yeah, because that's because they can. So it's just kind of the perfect storm.
For the consumer, when I come here and buy stuff, am I going to notice that the things I buy every year are going to be a little bit more expensive?
I don't know that you'll notice. All the plants have stayed. We took very little increase in any plant material. Anything imported, yeah, definitely had. And then local freight has been an issue too. Concrete pots that are made in the United States, but the freight can be up 20, 30, 40%. Again, I guess because they can. It's not as, it's more competitive.
Let me ask you specifically about the garden stuff, because you're
Yeah.
now even more into plants and nurseries than before. The conventional wisdom is a lot of people took up gardening last year. Have you been having any trouble obtaining plants or
Yeah.
keeping things in stock?
Yeah. Now, we pre-booked a lot more material than we ever have. Last year, I've never called growers, and I felt like I was making a deal down by the dock. Hey, Mike, you got anything? Yeah, I got something. You got 6 racks? Yeah, I think I can do 6. I would have no idea what was coming. He goes, I can get you some stuff. And then whatever he had, he sent it. That's not the way business is done. I drill down to how many flats of white impatiens I want.
Oh, yeah. So this is when you're into the pandemic already.
This is in. So this is last season. Yeah. So this year now we have a lot of material booked. So if you didn't book material and you were just going on open availability lists, you'll find pretty empty. We're a decent size garden center, so our growers work with us. They appreciate the relationship we have, so we were able to book a lot of material. But there's still shortages. Like we had a truck that has just pulled up today that is missing hibiscus bushes out of Florida. It's like they oversold them. They don't have them, and that was pre-booked material. So yeah, there's shortage because there still is a lot of demand. So the first-year gardeners, I guess, are going to become second-year gardeners.
So despite all the problems you're experiencing, how have your sales been?
Sales have been great.
Yeah.
I know there's so much pain and entertainment and the winners and losers. And, we happen to be on the winning team because we're selling stuff that people want to stay home. Mm-hmm. And it is, and you see it. We've hired, we have a restaurant in our Keystone location, and we have a great team in there from big name restaurants because there wasn't enough work.
Yeah, I would assume demand is a good thing, but you're still able to take advantage of it, even though you're not getting everything that you want when you want it.
No, we're not getting everything, and it, like I say, it's the culture shift just in that 1 year. Is amazing how it's like, well, I want a 5-gallon bucket. How about a 3-gallon bucket? Okay. It's like before they'd look at it like, why don't you have any 5-gallon buckets? You're not ordering? Well, who's running this place? And now it's like, okay, I'll take 2-gallon buckets, So, and it still is, or the paint is There's starting to be shortage in paint, same thing with resins and paint. And part of it is a hoarding thing. When the word goes out, hey, they're going to be short on garden hoses, people start overbuying. Probably, and I'm talking about stores. I'm talking about retailers will start booking a lot more maybe than what they need. The smarter companies like Benjamin Moore started limiting the amount of gallons that they would ship to a dealer because they saw what was happening. But that those whether they're rumored, I'm sure they're based in some fact, but those things start happening and dealers instantly start stocking up. We have a bird seed line called Mr. Bird. They're 5 weeks out. 5 weeks to get bird seed. So we did the same thing. We started putting in orders probably a lot bigger than because it's a really good line. And when they say they're 5 weeks, and all right, so we haven't got the first one, but we better put in another one. So I think some of it is probably caused from that.
For this year, year to date, I guess January through April, how are your sales this year compared to last year?
They still remain really strong. The early months of the year, in March, our stores were up 90%, which is really phenomenal for traditionally a slow month.
Year over year from the previous
year over
March.
year,
yeah.
From last March, which that was pandemic month. At least half of it was, but so it's just interesting. I don't know. I suspect we're starting to. April is the first month that two of our stores have more of a regular growth. Keystone store still way up, Allisonville way up. The hardware's more what I would expect, like a nice 5-10% growth.
From the previous month. Okay. From the previous year's month of that month. Okay. If you could go back in time and tell Pat Sullivan in February of 2020 what's about to happen, what would you advise him to do?
I would have just started buying stuff. I would have bought a bunch of Miracle-Gro fertilizer. We couldn't get dirt. We couldn't get potting mix. We couldn't, lump charcoal for the Big Green Egg or any of the Komodo style cookers. You could not get lump charcoal. Everybody was, grill enthusiasts started, the grill sales were through the roof. And that still hasn't recovered. We have a lot of, where we used to have just a Big Green Egg charcoal. Now we have a brand called Jealous Devil. We have Fogo. So a lot of these brands, these kind of side brands, have really gotten a look with consumers, which I think will, for those companies, they've really gotten some exposure because the mainline suppliers were short.
Well, I'll let you get back to work. I know you've got a lot to do today, but I really appreciate the time.
Well, thanks. It's good seeing you.
My thanks again to Scott Horvath and Pat Sullivan. IBJ's Kurt Christian has more about the continued high demand for home and garden products and the struggle for local retailers to stay adequately stocked in the latest print edition of IBJ. Or you can find the story online at ibj.com. And before you get on with the rest of your week, there are a few other strong stories I want to point out. First up, we learn that the government of Singapore is offering to buy nearly 1/5 ownership in Duke Energy Corp's Indiana operations for $2 billion. IBJ's John Russell digs into why Duke, the largest electricity utility in Indiana, would be interested, and why the proposal is raising eyebrows among some consumer and environmental groups. Also in this week's issue, Barb Burgetts explains why business interests are applauding the 2-year budget just passed by the Indiana legislature. State lawmakers came through for them in big ways this year by, for example, protecting employers from COVID-19 liability lawsuits, creating a $500 million regional grant program, providing $60 million in pandemic relief for small businesses, and maintaining healthy state reserves. And Susan Ort features the fledgling local chain Trust Hardware, which is bucking conventional wisdom about meshing e-commerce with brick-and-mortar locations. The company's 3 stores are open 24/7. They stress personal service and run on a strategy that owner Adam Taylor calls Amazon-proof. Again, you can read these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. I will say it's quite a bit easier to access all of the latest local news about business and politics, and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business community and economy if you're a subscriber. It works out to about $2 per week for actionable information you're not going to find anywhere else. So just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbender. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.